Cystic fibrosis can be a devastating diagnosis, but living with the disease can bring positivity and a new appreciation for each day. From the Bonnell Foundation in Detroit, Michigan, it's the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. Nothing on the Bonnell Foundation Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast should be considered medical advice. Medical advice can only come from your CF physician. Here's your host, Laura Bonnell.
My first introduction into the CF world was in 1989 when I went to work for the United Way in Ann Arbor. I was dating my now husband, Joe, and we didn't know that we were carriers of the CF gene. Dr. Francis Collins was at the University of Michigan doing CF research then, and that's when I met Jeff in the lab at the University of Michigan, and this is the first person with cystic fibrosis that I had ever met because, again, I was with the United Way, and we were working on some newspaper campaign that was going to tell everybody about the United Way's organizations, one of them being the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation that was a local chapter there. And that's when the CF gene was discovered in part by Dr. Francis Collins. So I was there when the gene was discovered that caused CF, when Dr. Francis Collins made that discovery, not knowing my future connection to cystic fibrosis. But of course, it was my destiny. Now, I have done interviews with Dr. Collins since my girls were born and diagnosed with the disease. The most recent interview was in the summer of 2018, and I asked him many questions in that CBS radio interview that I did, and he talked about a cure in 10 to 20 years. Now, something that I hadn't allowed myself to imagine is that there would be a cure in my girl's lifetime. Never thought it was possible. Now, this Trikafta is not a cure, of course, but it will change it from being something that the girls would be a fatal disease into a chronic illness. It occurred to me after the interview that with the 30-year anniversary, we should feature Dr. Collins and other CF scientists in my Portraits of Cystic Fibrosis calendar, along with 12 people with cystic fibrosis who were grateful for one another. And it turned out to be a wonderful calendar. Then we were in Nashville on November 1st, 2019. And Dr. Collins was there, but it was a surprise visit, and he was performing at 9 o'clock in the morning. He did a speech, and he did a couple of songs, and I was in a meeting. It was a really great meeting. It was an important meeting. I'm thankful for the meeting, but I missed hearing Dr. Collins speak and sing. So I was beside myself. I couldn't get over the fact that I came out of this meeting and everybody was talking about, oh my gosh, we saw Dr. Francis Collins. We were crying. Somebody played me a video, and I was literally sick to my stomach that I had missed him. So, of course, I go in my email. I email him, where are you? Are you still here? I have to see you. I have to hug you. I have to do an interview with you about the latest. And then it came back that he was out of town, so here's the person you should contact if you needed to get a hold of me. So, of course, I called that person right away, and I'm talking to them and explaining to them how desperate I am. I must see Dr. Collins while he's in Nashville and I'm in Nashville. And a call was coming in, but I ignored it because I had to make them understand how I must see him before he leaves. So after I get off the phone with them, just hoping, they said, well, we'll email him or we will let him know. And then I went back and listened to the voicemail of the call that I had missed. And it was Dr. Collins. He already had seen my email, called me back and said, well, yes, of course we're going to see each other. And I didn't even finish listening to the message. I still haven't had time to listen to the rest of that message, but I called him back right away. He answered and said, yes, of course. I'll be done with this presentation in 45 minutes, and I'll meet you out in the hallway. So it was a long 45 minutes because I was so excited to see him. And then he walked out. There he was. I took a picture of us together, and then we sat down and we talked for about a half an hour. And I feel like the hopes and dreams are now real as I wait for Trikafta to get into my girls' hands and into their bodies to make a difference. We will soon hopefully be able to breathe a little easier as this new drug has changed all of our lives. And everyone, we are all talking about not forgetting that 10%. And no one who is a CF parent or somebody with CF will ever forget the 10%, because everyone has to have a drug that will help them and allow them to live with this cystic fibrosis as a chronic illness and not as a death sentence. I remember when Kalydeco, Orkambi, and Symdeko were approved, and I was so happy for everyone that was going to benefit from that. But all I could think was, okay, just a few more years, there'll be something for my girls. Just a few more years. We just have to hang in there. And my girls, especially Emily, were just saying, I've got to stay healthy. I have to stay healthy. And we had a little scare with Emily. And I remember the fear of, oh no, maybe it's too late. Maybe it's not going to happen because maybe there's more lung damage. But then we found out there wasn't more lung damage. And so here we are today with good, beautiful lungs still for both girls, and they're going to get Trikafta. Fabulous news. And now, listen to this interview with Dr. Francis Collins. It is definitely my favorite interview ever. Thank you. Dr. Francis Collins is director of the National Institute of Health. My hero, as I always say. Since you discovered the gene that causes CF in 1989. We've talked about this before, but could you imagine this day where we now have a triple combo?
I dreamed of a day like this. I didn't know when it would come. I didn't know what the path would be that we had to travel to get here. Would it be a gene therapy? Would it be a drug therapy? I just wanted it to work. And I think all of us over these last 30 years have had ups and downs and moments where we thought, okay, we're right on the brink, and then things didn't quite turn out to be as simple. But today, with these pair of trials showing such dramatic results, so dramatic that FDA approved us in record time, we are really in a wonderful place.
We are in a wonderful place. And how do you feel knowing how far we've come? We still have the 10%, of course, and we're not forgetting them.
No, we are not. But
this is huge.
When you look at the effect of the triple therapy on anybody who has a delta F508 mutation, either 1 or 2, it is dramatic. It is as good as what we saw with the G551D now 7 years ago, when we thought, well, that may be the best we'll ever get, and it's too bad that only 5% of people have that one. But now here we are, looking as if 90% of people are in that same really amazing space. We must not forget that 10% of people will not probably benefit from these drugs because they don't have any functional protein that can be nurtured and tweaked by the triple therapy. And we have to have strategies for them too. And that's what the announcement yesterday, the path to the cure, was all about. And that's exactly what we should be doing, saying, hooray, look what we've done, but we're not done yet.
Can you explain it simply, kind of what Trikafta does, what the triple combo does?
Well, the main problem with the protein, the CFTR protein, when it has that delta F508 mutation, is that it doesn't fold very well. That's part of it. But even if you got it to fold properly, when it gets to the membrane where it's supposed to work, it doesn't turn on. It isn't gated the way it ought to be. So to have a successful outcome, you have to deal with both those problems. Firstly, the folding, which requires then something called the corrector. And then once it gets to the membrane, something to turn it on, kick it into action, the potentiator. It turns out maybe the harder part of this is the folding. And one corrector didn't seem to be quite enough. Triple therapy has 2 correctors plus a potentiator. And the combination has done what we all hoped would happen, gotten a lot of the functional protein to the right place and made it work.
And it seems like everyone's really heard the CF community and is working together better. I mean, the FDA, Dr. Janet Woodcock, another fabulous person, really got it through 5 months ahead of schedule, I believe it was.
Yeah. No, I think we've all waited so long for this kind of happy moment. And when the data looked so good, better, I think, than almost anybody dared to hope, then, gosh, put the accelerator down and get this out there. And FDA deserves a lot of credit for shortening up their timetables dramatically and getting this approved. So it's now, and we're ready to go.
And in your position, tell me how you still are obviously connected to the CF community as the director of the NIH.
Well, I started my own research career on cystic fibrosis. It's in my DNA, you might say. It's my heart and soul as well. So I've tracked this enterprise closely. I trained a few people who are now leaders in the field, like Mitch Drum, and I've ached sometimes when it seemed to be taking too long, and now I can celebrate with all the people here about what's happened. I will stay connected with cystic fibrosis as long as my brain is still working. So it's a joy and a privilege to be part of this family.
And thank goodness, because I say, yeah, you can never retire because we need you. And what do you say to people like, I have two daughters with cystic fibrosis. One of them is very concerned, what if this doesn't work for me? She hasn't received it yet. She's waiting for her clinic appointment. What if the side effects are too bad? I mean, it's, you won't know until you get the pill, but what do you say to people who are waiting?
I say, look at the phase 3 trials involving hundreds of people, all published now as of yesterday, so you can look and see what was the variability in the response, and most people got a really great response. And what was the side effects? They were not completely absent, but compared to most drugs that you might think about taking, it looked like a pretty good profile. So there's reasons for everybody to think this is going to help them. Obviously, we'll find out soon.
And you told some stories when you spoke earlier today. Can you relay some of the things along the way of your stories of people with CF and how things have changed?
Well, all those people that I know have touched me with their courage, with their determination to make the best of whatever was available at that time in their hopes that it would get better. I showed this morning this diary entry from Jenny, who at age 8 was writing in 1989 when the announcement came that the gene had been identified, with her hope that this was going to really be the best day. And now I've gotten back in touch with Jenny at age 38. And Jenny is exactly the kind of person that this kind of report is intended for. She has one copy of that Delta F508 and another copy of a variant that doesn't work. So she's in the class that really didn't have a treatment available until now. She's pretty excited. She's doing well with all the other treatments she's had. She's got an adorable little daughter, but she's looking forward to finding out how this works for her. So am I. Lots of other people, just like Jenny, today with the anticipation that the world has changed in a good way.
Right. Can you talk at all about the mRNA, the inhaled antibiotics that may be able to help the 10%?
There's a whole program the CF Foundation announced yesterday called The Path to the Cure to come up with strategies for the 10% that don't have functioning protein that can be activated. And that might involve using the drug mRNA, which codes for the protein you're missing. It might even be a gene editing approach where you're using this very exciting new development called CRISPR-Cas. You go in and actually fix the misspelling in the DNA instruction book of the cells in the airway and maybe other parts of the body too. And at that point, you do that once and you fix them. So that's promising. It's a ways off. How do you do that delivery so that it's safe and effective? And could go back again to a more classic, if you can call it that, gene therapy strategy, where you have a normal copy of CFTR inserted into some kind of viral delivery vector, and you spritz it into the airway and get that gene to take up residence in those cells that currently don't have one and see what can happen. And we tried that, of course, 25 years ago. It was a big push to do gene therapy. We ran into all kinds of obstacles, particularly the immune system saying, oh, no, you don't. But we've learned a lot since then. So ratcheting back up that particular area of research opportunity is going to be an important part of this. And I'm delighted to see that nobody is resting on their laurels for more than maybe a couple of hours here and moving right into this next question of how do we go from a great drug therapy for 90% of people to a cure that works for everybody.
Do you know the answer to that yet? I mean, do you have thoughts about that?
It's interesting to look at what's going on in the rest of the field of genetic disease treatments. There are 7,000 genetic diseases that we know the specific DNA misspelling. Most of them have no treatment at all. They're all looking at cystic fibrosis saying, boy, we'd sure like to have a program like that to help us. So there's a lot of interest in figuring out ways to come up with strategies. And particularly something like a gene therapy or a gene editing strategy could, if we figured out how to do it, and you could do it safely, might be adaptable to lots of diseases. So we at NIH have a whole program of this called our somatic cell gene editing program. It's kind of a mouthful, but it's trying to build the foundation of technology that we would need for almost any genetic disease to be cured this way. That's going to be a very important program for all the CF researchers to interact with as we try to solve many diseases in the next decade.
When everybody talks about the cost of drugs,
yeah,
I know because I've talked to so many pharmaceuticals that, for example, this Trikafta was $11 billion to do research, and not everything worked, right? So they realized it was 655 and 44, or 669 and 445, something like that. And so one didn't work, so there is a lot of cost. And there is abuse in the system, but it isn't everywhere. And that painting a broad picture,
yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think everybody would agree we can't stay on this same pathway of the cost of drugs being hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for lots of different diseases. We have to come up with ways to begin to get that under control. But when you consider the benefit of the triple therapy for people who otherwise were going to be saddled with all kinds of medical complications, which are pretty expensive, you have to think about that as well in terms of the balance. And one of the things we do at NIH is to try as best we can to develop the foundations of drug development to be even more efficient. So there are fewer failures, more successes, and therefore costs don't have to be so high. I certainly look forward to seeing for cystic fibrosis those costs beginning to come down, but I understand the reasons why that's hard to do overnight.
Is the cost in manufacturing, or is it just that everybody needs to, or are we not sure?
The cost is partly in manufacturing, but mostly it is the cost of paying back everything that had to be spent over many years of research to get to this point, which is not the kind of thing that comes easily or can be done without a deep investment of hundreds of thousands or hundreds of millions or sometimes billions of dollars. At the same time, I do think over the course of time, more competition in this area would be a good thing. More opportunities, as I said a minute ago, for research studies to be successful most of the time instead of failing most of the time, because you have to pay for those too. That's our ultimate solution. And meanwhile, I'm pleased to hear, talking to people at this meeting, that there's an expectation that anybody who qualifies for this drug, who needs it, should be able to get access to it without having financial obstacles get in the way or having their families bankrupted.
And we have talked to Children's Special Health Care in Michigan and Medicaid, and they, even though it's not on their formulary yet, they are saying that they will, as they get the prescriptions from the doctors, they will fill it. So they aren't getting, so that's great news.
That is great.
You know, that it's being proactive. But what do you think about things we have to change, like prior authorization that has held us up? I'm sure a lot of people deal with that. I mean, there's a lot to be done.
Our healthcare system is far from fine-tuned. There are a lot of things that need attention there for this and for lots of other things too.
Where do you go from here as far as, are you just going to be watching and participating in what's next for cystic fibrosis?
I'd like to be certainly engaged as much as I can be helpful in terms of making connections between what happens next and the overall field of gene editing and gene therapy and trying to cure genetic diseases, which is a big part of what NIH is doing. So I'll be connected, certainly with Mike Boyle, with Bill Scotch, with Preston as long as he's still there, although I'm seeing him understandably deciding it's time for him to move on. Yeah, no, I've got long-term friendly relationships with wonderful people at the CF Foundation. Those aren't going away.
And it is wonderful, the Path for a Cure, that they announced, the $500 million commitment. And again, I know we talked about this a little bit ago, but it took, 3 years to get Trikafta, things are moving so much quicker now. Do you see the 10% being, I know it's very hard to say.
I think we have to be really careful not to overpromise. It may seem to some people like Trikafta just came along in 3 years, but really to get there, that goes back to 1998. It's really 20 years to get there, step by painful step, with all kinds of disappointments as well as successes along the way. It's a 20-year program. To say that the next 10%, which we are going to need to approach in a totally different way, and mostly in a very early stage, is going to get this done in a rapid fashion over 2 or 3 years would not be realistic. But I know they're going to pull out every stop there is to accelerate that, recruit the best and the brightest to work on this problem. And I would be, I think, reluctant to bet against them. So watch this space. This is going to be the focus. And there will be, I think, remarkable opportunities for what needs to happen with cystic fibrosis to interact with a lot of energy and a lot of resources that are going into all genetic diseases right now. It's a good time to see the entire field move forward.
As you were saying, it's because they started with Kalydeco, and then it was Orkambi and Semdeco, and so everything was a process, learning from all of that, right. Correct, and moving forward.
And even getting Kalydeco, that was not something that happened right then either. That started a good 14 years earlier. Painful step of trying to find any indication of some kind of small molecule that might show some benefit for some version of CFTR, and going through the cell experiments and then the animal experiments, and then having to convince the FDA it was time to put this into patients, and all that. That's a lot of steps. It takes a lot of time. And in this moment of celebration, we should both recognize what went into that 20-year pathway and also recognize that we are starting down a parallel pathway now for the cure, for the 10%, that we may be able to go faster than 20 years, but let's not be naive about how many steps we still have in front of us before we could declare victory to that one and have another wonderful symposium where I get to sing Dare to Dream.
Right. I know. I wish you had your guitar with you, because I would have you sing now. Yeah, just the whole audience crying is what I hear.
It's hard not to be crying on the stage too, I'll tell you.
Yes. When we talk about the Trikafta and the drugs that correct the underlying cause of CF, what is the difference when you find a cure?
Well, the main difference is you don't have to take meds anymore. You're done.
So you're
because let's be clear, Trikafta, as wonderful as it is, this is something you will be taking for life unless we come up with something better. So that's fine if it gives you that kind of benefit, hooray. But if you really had to make your ideal choice emerge, it would be a one-shot thing that basically says, I don't have CF anymore. I don't have to take meds. That's a very bold assumption that we could actually get there, but I think it's the right time to pursue that. So that would be most likely a modification in DNA to fix the misspelling so that it's not present any longer, and that means all of the cells that have been fixed are fixed. And of course, it's critical in that situation that you get to the compartment, particularly in the airway, of those cells that are self-renewing, the stem cells of the airway, because if you fix them, then you fix the airway for life.
And that's gene editing you're talking about?
That's gene editing.
Yes.
The same could be done with a gene therapy vector where you're inserting a normal copy of CFTR. But you need to get it into the right cells, not just the ones that are here today and gone tomorrow, but the ones that are going to be the source of your cells in the airway for the rest of your life, those stem cells. They're kind of a critical part of this whole plan that people are putting together.
And as we wrap this up, to parents who have children born today with cystic fibrosis, what a different world they're coming into. I mean, my oldest is 24, and now I just think such promise if you have a child born today.
Indeed, and a very important next set of steps that are starting already is to find out how early can you safely start a triple therapy, and how early do you want to start in order to prevent people developing already serious lung disease that might not be entirely reversible. I know there's a study already underway for kids 6 to 11. We'll want to know, could you actually start treating a child shortly after birth if they're picked up by newborn screening? Why not start now? maybe in those situations, it wouldn't just be the lung situation that's preserved. You might even preserve some pancreatic function as well. Wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be amazing. So much promise, and so thankful for all the work that you've done and continue to do in the CF community. Do you want to sing at all?
I think I did that this morning with a guitar and about 5,000 people to help me.
Yes,
Maybe not now. That would be probably a poor substitute, to put it mildly.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Well, appreciate yours, and thanks for what you're doing to get the word out. I know a lot of people are really excited, but they need to understand what it means, and you're helping. Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. For more information and to learn more about the Bonnell Foundation, check us out online at thebonnellfoundation.org. That's the BONNELL foundation.org. Or follow us on social at the Bonnell Foundation.